The morning sun cast long shadows through the tall windows of Denver District Court. But inside Courtroom 3B, the atmosphere was anything but bright. Judge Margaret Chun adjusted her black robes and surveyed the packed gallery with the practiced eye of someone who had presided over thousands of cases in her 23-year career. Today felt different, though. The air itself seemed to crackle with an electric tension that made her stomach clench with foreboding. The Torres v. Torres custody case had been making headlines for weeks, ever since Michael Torres posted a 15-minute Facebook video that went viral overnight. In it, he'd accused his ex-wife Sarah of psychological manipulation, parental alienation, and turning their 7-year-old daughter Emma into what he called a weapon of revenge. The video had been viewed 2.3 million times, spawning countless response videos, think pieces, and heated social media debates about divorce, custody rights, and children caught in the crossfire of failed marriages. News vans lined the street outside the courthouse like mechanical vultures. Court TV had been granted permission to live stream the proceedings, and Judge Chun could see the red recording lights blinking ominously from 3 different camera angles. She'd initially opposed the media circus, but both legal teams had argued that transparency would serve the public interest. Now, watching the packed gallery of reporters, legal students, and curious onlookers, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Sarah Torres sat at the plaintiff's table, her auburn hair pulled into a severe bun that emphasized the sharp angles of her face. She wore a navy blue blazer that looked expensive, but couldn't quite hide the tremor in her hands as she shuffled through legal documents. Her attorney, Rebecca Hamilton, was known throughout Colorado as the Divorce Dragon, a nickname she'd earned by securing some of the most favorable settlements in state history. Hamilton's reputation preceded her into every courtroom, brilliant, ruthless, and absolutely devoted to destroying opposing parties. Across the aisle, Michael Torres sat with his own legal heavyweight, David Morrison, whose silver hair and $1,000 suits masked a calculating mind that had never lost a custody case. Michael looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. His normally athletic frame appeared diminished, hunched over in a wrinkled shirt that suggested he'd grabbed it from a pile of laundry. Dark circles under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights and the kind of stress that slowly devours a man from the inside out. But it was the small figure in the third row that drew Judge Chun's attention and held it with invisible chains. 7-year-old Emma Torres sat between 2 strangers, a court-appointed advocate named Lisa Rodriguez and a child psychologist, Dr. Janet Winters, looking like a fragile bird trapped in a cage of adult fury. Her Disney princess backpack, decorated with faded stickers of Elsa and Anna, seemed impossibly large against her tiny frame. She wore a yellow sundress that her grandmother had probably picked out, and her dark hair was braided with the kind of meticulous care that suggested someone had been trying very hard to make this day special, despite its terrible purpose. Emma's legs dangled from the wooden bench, her feet not quite touching the floor. She swung them back and forth in a nervous rhythm, her patent leather shoes catching the fluorescent light. Every few seconds, she would glance toward her parents, then quickly look away, as if the sight of them caused physical pain. Judge Chun had seen thousands of children in similar circumstances, but something about Emma's profound stillness, the way she seemed to be holding her breath against the world, made her heart ache in ways that surprised her. Near the witness stand, in a position carefully calculated for maximum therapeutic benefit, lay K-9 Officer Rex. The German Shepherd was a magnificent specimen, 90 pounds of muscle and intelligence, wrapped in a coat of black and tan that gleamed under the chin. Courtroom lights. His amber eyes missed nothing, constantly scanning the room with the alertness of a creature trained to detect danger in all its forms. Rex had been part of the Denver Police Department's Victim Services Unit for 4 years, providing comfort and support during the most traumatic legal proceedings the courts handled. Officer Martinez, Rex's handler, stood at attention near the back wall, his uniform crisp despite having been on duty since 5 a.m. Martinez had volunteered for this assignment because he understood, perhaps better than most, what it meant to watch a family destroy itself. His own parents had fought a bitter custody battle when he was 8, and he still remembered the feeling of being invisible while adults screamed about him, as if he were property to be divided rather than a human being who needed love and stability. The gallery buzzed with whispered conversations and the soft clicking of laptop keyboards as reporters prepared their real-time coverage. Legal experts who had driven from as far as Chicago sat with notebooks open, ready to analyze every procedural nuance. Law students from the University of Denver filled an entire row, their eager faces bright with the academic fascination of watching theory become brutal reality. Judge Chun's gavel, a simple piece of polished wood that had become an extension of her authority, lay on the bench before her like a weapon waiting to be wielded. She had used it to sentence criminals, dissolve marriages, and determine the fates of countless children. But today, as she prepared to bring it down and officially open the proceedings that would decide Emma Torres's future, she felt the weight of something much heavier than wood in her hand. The courtroom's acoustics seemed to amplify every sound. The rustle of papers, the creak of wooden benches, the soft whir of ventilation systems. Even breathing seemed too loud in the pregnant silence that preceded legal warfare. Judge Chun took one final look at the assembled combatants and spectators, her gaze lingering on Emma's small, still figure. None of them could have predicted that within the next hour, 2 simple words would transform everything they thought they knew about justice, family, and the power of a child's voice to cut through the noise of adult fury and reach the heart of what really mattered. Judge Chun's gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to fracture the morning's fragile peace. "The court is now in session," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of 2 decades on the bench. "We are here today for the custody determination hearing in the matter of Torres v. Torres." The words hung in the air like the opening notes of a funeral dirge, setting in motion events that would soon spiral far beyond anyone's control. Rebecca Hamilton, the plaintiff's attorney, rose from her seat with the predatory grace of a shark, scenting blood in the water. Her reputation as the divorce dragon wasn't merely courthouse gossip. It was a warning carved in the bones of opposing counsel who had faced her razor-sharp legal mind and lost everything in the process. She adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses and smiled at Judge Chun, but the expression never reached her eyes. "Your Honor," Hamilton began, her voice smooth as silk wrapped around a blade, "what we have before us today isn't simply a custody dispute. It's a case study in systematic psychological abuse, parental manipulation, and the tragic consequences of alcoholism on an innocent child." She paused, letting the words settle like poison in the courtroom air. The reporters in the gallery leaned forward collectively, their fingers poised over keyboards and notepads. Sarah Torres sat rigidly at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. She had rehearsed this moment countless times with Hamilton, practicing her testimony in front of mirrors, perfecting the delicate balance between vulnerability and strength it would make. Her appears sympathetic to the judge. But now, under the harsh fluorescent lights and the unblinking eyes of cameras, she felt exposed, like a specimen pinned to a display board. Hamilton moved to the evidence table with theatrical precision, her heels clicking against the marble floor in a staccato rhythm that seemed to match the elevated heartbeat of everyone in the room. She lifted a manila folder, thick with documents, photographs, and medical records, the ammunition she had spent months gathering for this legal war. "Exhibit A, Your Honor, she announced, holding up a photograph that made several people in the gallery gasp audibly. It showed Emma's bedroom wall with a spider web of cracks radiating outward from a central impact point. This is the result of a beer bottle that my client's ex-husband threw in a drunken rage on the evening of March 15th. The bottle missed 7-year-old Emma Torres by approximately 18 inches. Michael Torres shot up from his chair like a man struck by lightning, his face cycling rapidly through shades of red and purple. His attorney, David Morrison, immediately grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back down, but Michael was beyond reason. The accusation had hit him like a physical blow, and his years of construction work had taught him to respond to attacks with immediate, overwhelming force. That's a goddamn lie. Michael's roar echoed off the courtroom walls, causing Emma to flinch visibly in her seat. Several reporters began typing frantically, capturing every word of his outburst for their live feeds. She's a manipulative psychopath. Who's coaching our daughter to fear me? She probably threw that bottle herself and took pictures for evidence. Judge Chan's gavel came down repeatedly, the sharp sounds cutting through the chaos like gunshots. Mr. Torres, you will control yourself. In my courtroom, or you will be removed. But her words seemed to bounce off him harmlessly. Years of frustration, sleepless nights, and financial ruin had built up inside him like steam in a pressure cooker, and Sarah's accusations had finally blown the safety valve. Morrison was on his feet now, his silver hair catching the light as he tried to physically restrain his client. Your Honor, I apologize for my client's outburst. We request a brief recess to no recess. Michael snarled, shrugging off Morrison's grip with the strength of a man who had spent his life moving concrete and steel. She's been poisoning my daughter's mind for 2 years. Every phone call, every video chat, Emma gets more distant, more afraid. Sarah tells her I'm a monster, and then acts surprised when Emma believes it. Hamilton smiled coldly, recognizing that Michael was doing her job for her. Every word out of his mouth was being recorded, every gesture captured on video that would be replayed endlessly on social media and legal analysis shows. She had seen this pattern countless times before. Men who couldn't control their temper in the courtroom rarely controlled it at home. Your Honor, Hamilton continued with devastating calm, I present Exhibit B, a recording of a voicemail Mr. Torres left for my client at 2:47 a.m. on April 3rd. She nodded to her paralegal, who pressed a button on a small digital recorder. Michael's voice, slurred with alcohol and rage, filled the courtroom. You vindictive bitch, you're stealing my daughter from me. I swear to God, Sarah, I'll make you pay for this. I'll take everything from you, just like you're taking everything from me. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Even Michael's own attorney visibly winced, recognizing that the case had just taken a catastrophic turn. The gallery erupted in whispers and the soft clicking of camera shutters. Emma, who had been sitting perfectly still up to this point, began to tremble like a leaf in a storm. That was taken out of context. Michael protested, but his voice had lost its thunder, replaced by the desperate whine of a man watching his life crumble in real time. I was drunk, I was emotional, but I would never hurt Emma. She's everything to me. Sarah Torres rose slowly from her seat, tears streaming down her face with perfect theatrical timing. Your Honor, she said, her voice breaking with practiced precision. I live in fear every day. Emma asks me why Daddy is so angry all the time. She started having nightmares, wetting the bed, refusing to eat. The child psychologist says she's showing signs of severe anxiety disorder. The courtroom had become a battlefield where words served as weapons and emotions were artillery shells designed for maximum destruction. In the third row, Emma Torres sat frozen between her court-appointed guardians, her small body absorbing every accusation, every shout, every tear like a sponge soaking up poison. Her Disney princess backpack, which had seemed so bright and hopeful that morning, now appeared grotesquely out of place in this adult theater of cruelty. Officer Martinez watched from his position near the back wall, his trained eyes moving, constantly between the warring parents and the child caught in their crossfire. Rex, the German shepherd at his side, had begun to show signs of agitation. His ears were pinned back, his amber eyes fixed on Emma with the intensity of an animal sensing distress. The dog's training had taught him to recognize trauma in all its forms, and right now, every instinct he possessed was screaming that something was terribly wrong. The legal proceedings continued their inexorable march toward disaster, each accusation more devastating than the last, each piece of evidence another nail in the coffin of what had once been a family. None of the adults seemed to notice that. In their zeal to destroy each other, they were also destroying the very child they claimed to be fighting for. The courtroom had transformed into a gladiatorial arena where two people who had once promised to love each other, till death do us part, were now locked in mortal combat, wielding their shared history as weapons of mutual destruction. Judge Chun felt the situation slipping through her fingers like sand, each attempt to restore order only seeming to accelerate the chaos spiraling out of control. David Morrison, Michael's silver-haired attorney, stood with the desperate urgency of a man trying to save a sinking ship with a teacup. His expensive suit couldn't hide the perspiration beading on his forehead as he watched his client's case evaporate in real time. Your Honor, these recordings were obtained through illegal surveillance of my client's private communications. We moved to have them excluded from... Excluded? Sarah's voice cut through Morrison's objection like a scythe through wheat. She had risen from her chair, no longer the controlled, strategic plaintiff her attorney had coached her to be. 2 years of accumulated rage, fear, and sleepless nights had finally found their voice. He threatened to destroy me. He's been stalking me, following me to work, sitting outside Emma's school in his truck for hours. The man is unhinged. Michael's face contorted with a fury so pure it seemed to distort the very air around him. The construction worker's powerful frame trembled with barely contained violence as he pointed an accusing finger at his ex-wife. You lying, manipulative witch. I was never stalking you. I was trying to see my own daughter. You moved her to a new school without telling me, changed your phone number, blocked me on every social media platform. You systematically cut me out of Emma's life and then act surprised when I fight back. The accusation hung in the air like a live grenade with the pin pulled. Several gallery members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, recognizing that they were witnessing something far more raw and dangerous than typical legal theater. This wasn't just a custody dispute. It was the public vivisection of a family's corpse, each parent desperately trying to prove they deserved to keep the pieces. Rebecca Hamilton sensed the moment shifting and moved quickly to capitalize on Michael's emotional instability. Your Honor, this is exactly the kind of volatile behavior that has traumatized my client and her daughter. Mr. Torres cannot control his temper in a controlled courtroom environment. How can we expect him to control it in the privacy of his own home with a defenseless child? Don't you dare question my love for my daughter. Michael's roar shattered what remained of courtroom decorum. He slammed his fist down on the defendant's table with such force that water glasses jumped and crashed to the floor, sending shards of crystal spinning across the marble like frozen tears. The sound of breaking glass seemed to echo endlessly. In the suddenly silent room, Bailiff Thompson's hand moved instinctively to his weapon as years of training kicked in. He had seen domestic disputes turn violent in seconds, and every muscle in his body was coiled for action. The security cameras mounted in the corners of the room swiveled to focus on Michael's enraged form, their mechanical eyes recording every second for posterity and potential evidence. Sarah screamed back with equal fury, her carefully constructed facade finally cracking under the pressure. Love? You call threatening to burn down my house love? You call showing up drunk at Emma's birthday party and terrifying her friends love? She hides in the closet when she hears your voice on the phone, Michael. Your own daughter is afraid of you. The words hit Michael like physical blows, and he staggered backward as if she had actually struck him. That's because you taught her to be afraid. You poisoned her mind against me. Emma used to run to me when I came home from work. She used to beg me to read her bedtime stories. You took that away from me, Sarah. You took everything away from me. In the gallery, Dr. Winters, the court-appointed child psychologist, watched Emma with growing alarm. The 7-year-old had gone rigid in her seat, her small body locked in a position that spoke of pure terror. Her breathing had become rapid and shallow, the kind of hyperventilation pattern that preceded full panic attacks. The child's hands were pressed flat against her ears, but the screaming voices of her parents seemed to penetrate her defenses anyway. Lisa Rodriguez, the court advocate sitting beside Emma, gently tried to take the child's hand, but Emma jerked away as if human touch might burn her. Her dark eyes, once bright with childhood wonder, had become hollow windows looking into a soul that had seen too much, endured too much, and was finally reaching its breaking point. Judge Chun opened her mouth to call for order, raising her gavel to restore some semblance of control to the proceedings, but Michael wasn't finished. 2 years of frustration, unemployment, and legal fees that had drained his savings account had built up inside him like magma in an active volcano, and Sarah's accusations had finally triggered the eruption. You want to know what kind of father I am? He screamed, his voice cracking with emotion. I worked 16-hour days to pay for that house you're living in. I coached Emma's soccer team every weekend. I was the one who sat up all night when she had pneumonia, not you. You were too busy with your nursing shifts and your book club and your goddamn yoga classes to notice your own daughter was sick. The court reporter's fingers had frozen over her stenographic machine, unable to keep pace with the rapid fire exchange of accusations and counter-accusations. The usually efficient clicking of keys had been replaced by an ominous silence that seemed to amplify every harsh word, every labored breath, every heartbeat of the terrified child caught in the crossfire. Sarah's response came like a missile strike. At least I didn't choose alcohol over my family. At least I didn't lose my job because I showed up drunk to a construction site. At least I didn't stop to. The voice that cut through their battlefield wasn't Judge Chun's authoritative command or the bailiff's warning shout. It was something far more devastating, the broken cry of a 7-year-old girl who had finally reached the limits of human endurance. Emma Torres stood in the third row, her small form trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. Tears streamed down her face as she looked back and forth between her parents with an expression of such profound betrayal that it seemed to suck the oxygen from the entire courtroom. For a moment that felt like eternity, the only sound was the soft whir of ventilation systems and the distant hum of traffic outside. Then Emma took a step forward, then another, her patent leather shoes clicking against the floor with the determined rhythm of a child who had nothing left to lose. Her Disney princess backpack slipped from her shoulder and fell to the floor with a soft thud, forgotten in this moment of desperate courage. Rex, the German shepherd who had been lying quietly near the witness stand, lifted his massive head. His amber eyes, trained to recognize trauma and desperation, locked onto the approaching child. Every instinct in his highly trained body told him that something momentous was about to happen, something that would change everything. Time seemed to stretch and distort as Emma Torres took another trembling step forward, her small frame moving through the courtroom with the surreal quality of a sleepwalker navigating a nightmare. The chaos around her, the screaming parents, The clicking cameras, the whispered conversations of spectators, began to fade into a distant hum, as if someone were slowly turning down the volume on the entire world. Her patent leather shoes, polished to perfection by her grandmother that morning, in a futile attempt to make this day special, clicked against the marble floor with metronomic precision. Each step seemed to echo through the suddenly hushed courtroom, drawing every eye in the room to this tiny figure who had somehow become the center of a legal storm that had consumed headlines for weeks. Rex lifted his massive head from his position near the witness stand, his amber eyes tracking Emma's approach with the intense focus of a creature whose entire existence had been devoted to recognizing and responding to human distress. The German. Shepard's ears, usually alert but relaxed during court proceedings, were now fully erect, every muscle in his powerful body coiled with anticipation. 4 years of training with the Denver Police Department's Victim Services Unit had taught him to read the subtle signs of trauma, the micro-expressions, the body language, the barely perceptible changes in breathing and heart rate that humans often missed. Officer Martinez, standing at attention near the back wall, felt his own training kick in as he watched Emma's slow procession toward his partner. Something in the child's movement pattern triggered alarm bells in his mind. The deliberate, almost robotic quality of her steps, the way her arms hung limply at her sides, the 1,000-yard stare that spoke of a mind pushed beyond its breaking point. He had seen that look before, in the eyes of abuse victims and trauma survivors who had finally reached the moment where silence was no longer an option. Sarah Torres had stopped mid-sentence, her accusations dying on her lips as maternal. Instinct suddenly overrode legal strategy. For the first time in months, she truly looked at her daughter not as a pawn in her chess game against Michael, not as evidence to be presented to the court, but as a human being who was suffering. The sight of Emma's tear-streaked face and trembling form hit her like a physical blow, and she took an involuntary step forward, her hand reaching out instinctively. Michael, too, had fallen silent, his rage evaporating like mist in sunlight as he watched his little girl move through the courtroom with the devastating dignity of someone who had aged years in the span of hours. The man who had been roaring accusations moments earlier now stood frozen, his mouth hanging open, his construction-hardened hands trembling as if he were suddenly afraid to touch anything in case it shattered. Judge Chun felt her judicial composure crack as she watched this small child walk through her courtroom, carrying the weight of 2 adults' failures on her narrow shoulders. 23 years on the bench had shown her countless heartbreaking custody battles, but something about Emma's movement, the deliberate, almost ceremonial quality of it, made her throat constrict with an emotion she couldn't quite name. The court reporter's hands had completely stopped moving over her stenographic machine. The mechanical clicking that had provided a constant soundtrack to the morning's proceedings was now replaced by a silence so profound it seemed to have physical weight. Even the ventilation systems seemed to have quieted, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Rebecca Hamilton, the divorce dragon whose razor-sharp legal mind had dominated courtrooms for 2 decades, found herself speechless for perhaps the first time in her career. Her carefully orchestrated case strategy, built on months of preparation and strategic evidence presentation, suddenly seemed as irrelevant as yesterday's newspaper. This wasn't about legal precedent or custody arrangements anymore. This was about a child's soul, crying out in the only way it knew how. Emma reached Rex's position and slowly sank to her knees on the cold marble floor, her yellow sundress pooling around her like fallen sunlight. The German shepherd, his training taking over completely now, lowered himself into a lying position, making himself as non-threatening and accessible as possible. His massive head came down to Emma's level, his gentle amber eyes meeting her tear-filled brown ones with the kind of understanding that transcended species barriers. The child's small hands, which had been clenched into fists throughout the Morning's proceedings slowly uncurled as she reached toward Rex's thick coat. Her fingers disappeared into his fur, finding the kind of comfort that no adult had been able to provide. The dog's warmth seemed to unlock something deep inside her, some reservoir of trust that she had thought was permanently sealed. Dr. Winters, the child psychologist, leaned forward in her seat, recognizing the profound significance of what she was witnessing. In her 15 years of working with traumatized children, she had seen this moment before, the instant when a child's survival mechanisms finally gave way to their desperate need for connection and safety. Emma wasn't just seeking comfort from Rex. She was making a choice to trust, to be vulnerable, to speak her truth in the only way she felt safe doing. The cameras continued to roll, their mechanical eyes capturing every second of this unexpected turn in what had been scripted as a standard custody hearing. The reporters in the gallery had stopped typing, their fingers frozen over keyboards as they struggled to find words adequate to describe what they were witnessing. Emma buried her face in Rex's warm fur, her small frame shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her lungs. The dog remained perfectly still, his training and instincts working in perfect harmony to provide exactly what this broken child needed. Years of experience with trauma victims had taught him that sometimes the most powerful healing happened in silence, in the simple act of being present for someone who had nowhere else to turn. The courtroom held its collective breath as Emma lifted her head slightly, her lips close to Rex's ear. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the absolute silence that had fallen over the room, her two simple words carried with the force of a thunderclap. "Save me." The words hung in the air like a prayer spoken in a cathedral, transforming the sterile courtroom into something sacred and terrible. Judge Chun's gavel, which she had been holding aloft to restore order, remained frozen in mid-air as the full impact of the child's plea registered. This wasn't just a courtroom outburst or a manipulation tactic. This was the cry of a human soul that had been pushed to its absolute limit. In that moment, Emma Torres had accomplished what months of legal maneuvering, thousands of dollars in attorney fees, and hours of testimony had failed to achieve. She had spoken the truth, pure, unfiltered, and devastating in its simplicity. 2 words from a 7-year-old had just changed everything. The silence that followed Emma's whispered plea stretched across the courtroom like a living thing, wrapping itself around every person present with an almost tangible weight. Judge Margaret Chun felt something fundamental shift inside her chest knot. Just as a jurist, but as a human being who had just witnessed a child's soul laid bare in 2 devastating words. Her gavel, still frozen in mid-air, began to tremble in her grip as the full magnitude of what she had just heard settled into her bones. Rex, the German shepherd whose amber eyes had seen countless victims find their voice in courtrooms across Denver, placed his massive head gently against Emma's trembling shoulder. His 4 years of specialized training had prepared him for this exact moment, when a traumatized individual finally felt safe enough to speak their truth. The dog's warm breath created a small pocket of comfort around the child, a sanctuary within the storm of adult fury that had been raging around her. Officer Martinez took a careful step forward from his position near the back wall, every instinct in his law enforcement training screaming that he was witnessing something that would change not just this case, but potentially the entire approach to family court proceedings. His own childhood, scarred by a bitter custody battle that had treated him like property rather than a human being, made Emma's simple plea resonate in places he thought he had sealed off years ago. Judge Chun slowly lowered her gavel and rose from her bench, her black robes rustling like the wings of some great bird preparing to take flight. 23 years of judicial experience had taught her to maintain professional distance, to view each case through the lens of legal precedent and statutory requirements. But Emma's two words had shattered those carefully constructed barriers, leaving her face to face with the raw human cost of their legal system's failures. "Clear the courtroom," she said quietly, her voice carrying despite its softness. "Everyone, except essential personnel, out. Now." The gallery erupted in a buzzing of confused voices. Reporters protested, their cameras still rolling as they sensed the story of their careers unfolding before their eyes. Legal observers and law students began gathering their belongings reluctantly, understanding that they were being dismissed from something historic, but powerless to remain. "Your Honor," Rebecca Hamilton began, her legal mind automatically calculating how this unexpected development might affect her carefully constructed case strategy. "We haven't completed the presentation of evidence. The court's decision to—" "Ms. Hamilton," Judge Chun's voice cut through the attorney's objection like a blade through silk. "I am clearing this courtroom. That is not a request, it is an order. Anyone who does not comply immediately will be held in contempt." Bailiff Thompson began efficiently escorting people toward the exits, his years of experience reading Judge Chun's moods telling him that this was not a moment for debate or delay. The clicking of heels and shuffling of feet gradually faded as the courtroom emptied, leaving only the essential players in this family drama: Judge Chun, the two attorneys, Sarah and Michael Torres, Dr. Winters, Lisa Rodriguez, Officer Martinez, Rex, and most importantly, Emma. The absence of the gallery's buzzing energy and the mechanical whir of recording equipment created an entirely different atmosphere. The courtroom, stripped of its theatrical audience, suddenly felt more like a therapy session than a legal proceeding. The harsh fluorescent lights seemed softer somehow, the marble floors less cold, the wooden benches more inviting rather than imposing. Judge Chun approached Emma's position slowly, removing her reading glasses and tucking them into her robes. Her judicial authority seemed to melt away with each step, replaced by something more fundamental: a grandmother's instinct, protector's heart, a human being's natural response to a child in crisis. "Emma," she said gently, lowering herself to sit cross-legged on the marble floor beside the child and the dog. The sight of a respected judge in her formal robes sitting on a courtroom floor was so unprecedented that both attorneys stared in stunned silence. "Sweetheart, can you tell me what you need me to know?" Emma lifted her head from Rex's fur, her dark eyes swimming with tears that had been building for months, perhaps years. The dog remained perfectly still, his training and instincts working in harmony to provide exactly the right amount of support, present but not overwhelming, protective but not constraining. "They fight about me," Emma whispered, her 7-year-old voice carrying the weight of wisdom no child should possess. "Every night. On the phone, Mommy cries and throws things at the wall after she talks to Daddy. She says bad words about him and asks if I want to live somewhere he can't find us." Sarah Torres gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth as if she could somehow recall the damage her words had done. Months of her attorney's coaching to present herself as the stable, nurturing parent evaporated in the face of her daughter's innocent honesty. "And Daddy," Emma continued, her small voice growing stronger as Rex's steady presence gave her courage, "he smells funny when he picks me up. Like the bottle Uncle Jimmy hides in the garage. He drives really fast and yells at other cars. And sometimes he forgets to feed me dinner because he falls asleep on the couch." Michael Torres felt his knees buckle as his daughter's words hit him like physical blows. He groped for his chair, his face draining of color as he realized that Emma had been watching, listening, absorbing every moment of his self-destructive spiral. The construction worker who had been ready to fight the world to keep his daughter suddenly saw himself through her eyes, and the reflection was devastating. Dr. Winters, the child psychologist, felt her professional composure crack as she witnessed something she had only read about in textbooks: a child finally feeling safe enough to speak truth to power. Emma wasn't performing for the adults or trying to choose sides in her parents' war. She was simply, heartbreakingly, telling the truth about her lived experience. "I sleep in my closet," Emma continued, the words tumbling out now like water through a broken dam. "I have a flashlight and my stuffed animals, and I put on headphones so I can't hear them hate each other. I made a bed out of old blankets, and I keep crackers in a shoebox because sometimes there's no food when I get hungry at night." The revelation hit the courtroom like a physical force. This child, this 7-year-old little girl, had been living in survival mode, creating her own safe space in a closet because the adults who were supposed to protect her had turned their home into a battlefield. Judge Chun felt tears building behind her eyes for the first time in her judicial career. "Emma, honey, how long have you been sleeping in the closet?" "Since the big fight when Daddy broke the kitchen table," Emma replied with the matter-of-fact tone children use when describing trauma they've normalized. "That was after my 6th birthday. Mommy had a black eye the next day, but she said she fell down the stairs." The silence that followed this revelation was different from the shocked quiet that had greeted Emma's initial plea. This was the silence of adults confronting the full scope of their failures, the silence of a legal system realizing it had been asking the wrong questions, the silence of parents finally seeing their child as something more than a prize to be won. Rex shifted slightly, repositioning himself so that Emma could lean more comfortably against his warm flank. The dog's amber eyes moved between the adults in the room, his training allowing him to read the complex emotions playing across their faces. Years of working with trauma victims had taught him to recognize the exact moment when truth finally broke through denial, and he could sense that they had crossed that threshold. Judge Chun reached out slowly, her judicial authority completely set aside, and gently took Emma's small hand in hers. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "you are very brave for telling us the truth. And I want you to know that everything is going to be different now." Judge Margaret Chun remained seated on the cold marble floor, Emma's small hand still clasped gently in hers, as she felt the weight of judicial history pressing down upon her shoulders. In 23 years on the bench, she had never faced a moment quite like this, where every precedent, every legal protocol, every carefully constructed procedure seemed suddenly inadequate in the face of a child's raw truth. The courtroom around them had been transformed from battleground into something resembling a sanctuary, but she knew that what happened next would determine whether this moment of honesty would lead to healing or simply become another footnote. In a tragic case file, Dr. Janet Winters shifted forward in her seat, her professional training warring with her maternal instincts as she watched Emma's brave revelations unfold. As a child psychologist with 15 years of experience in family trauma, she had seen countless children caught in the crossfire of custody battles. But Emma's case was different. The systematic isolation, the survival behaviors, the normalization of violence and neglect. This child had been living in a state of chronic trauma that went far beyond typical divorce stress. "Your Honor," Dr. Winters said softly, her voice carefully modulated to avoid startling Emma. "What we're witnessing here is a child who has developed complex survival strategies, typically seen in war zones or severe abuse situations. The closet, sleeping, the food hoarding, the hypervigilance. Emma has been living in a constant state of fight or flight for months, possibly years." Sarah Torres sat frozen in her chair, her carefully applied makeup now streaked with tears as she truly saw her daughter for the first time in months. The woman who had spent countless hours with her attorney crafting the perfect victim narrative suddenly realized that she had never asked Emma what her own experience had been. The revelation that her daughter had been sleeping in a closet, surviving on crackers hidden in a shoebox, hit her like a physical blow to the chest. Michael Torres had aged a decade in the span of minutes. The man who had been ready to fight legal armies to maintain access to his daughter now saw himself. Through Emma's innocent eyes, the scary man who smelled like alcohol, who drove too fast while angry, who forgot to provide basic necessities like food. His construction-hardened hands trembled as he realized that in his war against Sarah, he had become exactly the kind of father he had sworn never to be. Judge Chun slowly rose from the floor, her decision crystallizing with each heartbeat. She moved to her bench not as the same jurist who had begun this hearing, but as someone fundamentally changed by witnessing a child's courage in speaking truth to power. The legal precedents that had guided her career suddenly seemed like distant abstractions compared to the immediate, undeniable reality of Emma's need for safety and healing. "I am implementing Emergency Protocol 7, Judge Chun announced, her voice carrying authority that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her judicial training. The attorneys in the room exchanged confused glances. Emergency Protocol 7 was a theoretical framework that had been discussed in legal journals, but never actually implemented in a real courtroom. It allowed judges to completely suspend traditional adversarial proceedings when a child's immediate welfare was at stake. Rebecca Hamilton, the divorce dragon, whose reputation had been built on winning custody battles through strategic warfare, found herself in uncharted territory. "Your Honor, with respect, there is no established Emergency Protocol 7 in Colorado family law. Such a deviation from standard custody procedures could be grounds for—" "Ms. Hamilton," Judge Chun interrupted, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that brooked no argument. "I am creating Emergency Protocol 7 right here, right now. This court is suspending all adversarial proceedings in the matter of Torres v. Torres, effective immediately." The silence that followed was electric with possibility and terror in equal measure. Both attorneys realized they were witnessing something unprecedented in American family law, a complete rejection of the winner-take-all system that had governed custody disputes for decades. David Morrison cleared his throat nervously, his silver hair catching the light as he struggled to process what he was hearing. "Your Honor, while we appreciate the court's concern for the child's welfare, completely suspending custody proceedings without established legal framework could result in appeals, reversals, and ultimately delay the resolution that this family needs." Judge Chun turned her attention back to Emma, who was still kneeling beside Rex, drawing comfort from the therapy dog's steady presence. The child's tear-stained face and trembling hands told a story more compelling than any legal brief, more persuasive than any precedent. "I am ordering both Mr. and Mrs. Torres into immediate intensive family therapy," Judge Chun continued, her decision gaining momentum with each word. "Not couples counseling, family therapy, focused specifically on repairing the damage that has been done to their daughter. I am appointing Dr. Sarah Williams from the Colorado Family Healing Institute as their primary therapeutic coordinator. Dr. Williams was legendary in Denver's therapeutic community, a woman who had spent 2 decades developing revolutionary approaches to healing fractured families. Her methods were unconventional, sometimes controversial, but her success rate with seemingly hopeless cases was unmatched. Furthermore, Judge Chun continued, I am establishing Rex as Emma's official emotional support companion for the duration of this healing process. Officer Martinez, I am requesting that the Denver Police Department make Rex available for regular sessions with Emma as part of her therapeutic treatment plan. Officer Martinez nodded solemnly, understanding the profound responsibility being placed on his four-legged partner. Rex himself seemed to sense the weight of the moment, his amber eyes moving between Emma and the judge as if he understood that his role had just expanded far beyond standard courtroom support. This court will reconvene in exactly 6 months, Judge Chun declared, her voice ringing with finality. Not for adversarial proceedings, not for testimony designed to destroy the other parent, but to review the progress this family has made toward healing. Emma Torres will not be divided like property or assigned like a possession. She will be part of a family that has learned to function as a unit dedicated to her well-being. The revolutionary nature of Judge Chun's ruling sent shockwaves through the legal community before the attorneys had even left the courtroom. Court TV's live stream had captured every word, and legal scholars across the country were already analyzing the implications of a judge completely abandoning traditional custody procedures in favor of a healing-based approach. Sarah Torres approached Emma hesitantly, as if seeing her daughter for the first time. "Emma, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. Mommy didn't know. I didn't realize how scared you were." Michael Torres knelt beside his ex-wife, his own tears now flowing freely. "Princess, Daddy's going to get better. I'm going to stop drinking. I'm going to go to therapy. I'm going to become the father you deserve." Emma looked up at both parents, her small hand still buried in Rex's fur. "Are you going to stop fighting about me?" The question hung in the air with devastating simplicity. Judge Chun watched as two people who had spent months trying to destroy each other finally faced the real question at the heart of their case. Not who deserved to win, but how they could both become worthy of their daughter's trust again. "Yes, baby," Sarah whispered, reaching out to gently touch Emma's cheek. "We're going to learn how to be a family again. A different kind of family, but a real family." Judge Chun smiled as she watched the first tentative steps toward healing begin. Emma's 2 words to a therapy dog had accomplished something that legal precedent and statutory frameworks had failed to achieve. They had reminded everyone in that courtroom that behind every custody case was a human being who deserved better than adults, who had forgotten how to love without destroying. 6 months later, the same family that had once weaponized their love now sat in Dr. Sarah Williams' sunlit therapy office, arranged in a circle that would have been impossible to imagine during those dark days in Judge Chun's courtroom. The transformation hadn't been immediate or easy healing. Never is, but the evidence of their journey was written in everything from Emma's posture to the way her parents' eyes no longer held the sharp edges of constant warfare. Emma Torres, now 8 years old and 3 inches taller, sat cross-legged on the carpet with Rex beside her, his massive head resting contentedly in her lap. The German Shepherd had become more than her emotional support companion. He had become her bridge back to trusting the world around her. Their weekly sessions had evolved from desperate clinging to genuine partnership, with Emma learning to read Rex's signals and Rex responding to her emotional needs with the precision of a master craftsman. The child who had once hidden in closets now spoke with a confidence that amazed everyone who had witnessed her desperate plea 6 months earlier. Her dark hair, no longer stringy with neglect, caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through Dr. Williams' floor-to-ceiling windows. The yellow sundress had been replaced by jeans and a soccer jersey. She had joined a team, something that would have been impossible when her parents were too consumed with legal battles to remember the children needed activities beyond court. Appearances. "Tell me about your week, Emma," Dr. Williams said gently, her voice carrying the warmth that had made her legendary in Denver's therapeutic community. The woman was in her 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes that had seen thousands of fractured families find their way back to each other. Her office reflected her philosophy: comfortable furniture, arranged in circles rather than hierarchical rows, plants everywhere, and toys strategically placed to help even the most traumatized children find their voice. "Daddy came to my soccer game on Saturday," Emma announced with the kind of pride that made both parents' eyes well up with tears they no longer tried to hide. "He brought orange slices for the whole team, and he didn't yell at the referee even when that girl from the other team kicked me." Michael Torres had undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation of anyone in the family. The man who had once terrorized courtrooms with his rage now coached Emma's soccer team with the patience of someone who had learned that strength came from building others up rather than tearing them down. 6 months of intensive alcohol rehabilitation, anger management therapy, and individual counseling with Dr. Williams had stripped away years of accumulated pain and replaced it with something resembling hope. I wanted to yell, Michael admitted. His construction-calloused hands clasped loosely in his lap. Every instinct I had said to jump up and defend my little girl. But then I remembered what we learned about being Emma's safe space instead of her storm. The words came easier now, after months of practice in expressing emotions without destroying things. His transformation hadn't been smooth or simple. There had been nights when the urge to drink felt overwhelming, mornings when the weight of his past mistakes made getting out of bed seem impossible, therapy sessions where he had sobbed like a broken child while confronting the damage his alcoholism had caused. But Emma's courage in speaking her truth to Rex had given him courage to face his own demons. Sarah Torres sat beside her ex-husband, not touching, but no longer radiating the toxic animosity that had once filled every space between them. Her own therapeutic journey had taken her through the labyrinth of her childhood trauma, helping her understand how her mother's depression and her father's emotional absence had shaped her into someone who equated love with control, safety with dominance. I started painting again, Sarah shared, a soft smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Emma asked me to teach her watercolors, and I realized I hadn't picked up a brush in 15 years. Not since before the marriage, before I convinced myself that creativity was a luxury I couldn't afford. The revelation had been part of Dr. Williams' revolutionary approach to family healing. Instead of focusing solely on conflict resolution, she worked to help each family member rediscover parts of themselves that had been lost in the chaos of their dysfunction. Sarah's art therapy had become a bridge between mother and daughter, giving them a way to communicate that bypassed the minefield of their shared trauma. "Show Dr. Williams the painting you made of Rex," Emma urged her mother, her excitement bubbling over in a way that would have been unimaginable 6 months earlier. Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled to a watercolor painting that captured Rex mid-run, his coat gleaming in sunlight, his expression one of pure joy. The technical skill was impressive, but what made the painting extraordinary was the emotion. It conveyed the love of someone who finally understood that healing could be beautiful. "Mom's going to enter it in a contest," Emma announced proudly. "And she's teaching art classes at the community center on weekends when I'm with Daddy." The custody arrangement they had developed through mediation looked nothing like the traditional alternating weekend schedule that family courts typically imposed. Instead, it flowed around Emma's needs, school schedule, and social activities. Some weeks she spent more time with Sarah, others with Michael, but the decision was made collaboratively rather than through court orders and rigid adherence to timesheets. Dr. Williams observed the family with the satisfaction of someone watching a masterpiece come together brushstroke by brushstroke. "Emma, how do you feel about the changes in your family?" The question that might have sent the 8-year-old into panic attacks 6 months earlier now prompted thoughtful consideration. Emma scratched behind Rex's ears, using the familiar motion to gather her thoughts. "It's different," she said finally. "They don't fight about me anymore. They fight about who gets to take me to the movies or who's going to help with my science project. It's like good fighting. Like they both want to be the best parent instead of trying to prove the other one is the worst parent." The wisdom in her observation left the adults momentarily speechless. This child, who had been forced to develop survival skills no 8-year-old should need, had articulated something that family court systems had failed to understand for decades. That healthy competition between parents could nurture a child rather than traumatize them. Michael and Sarah exchanged a look, not the venomous glares of their courtroom days, but the shared understanding of parents who had finally learned to put their daughter's well-being above their own wounded egos. "We have something we want to tell you," Sarah said to Emma, her voice carrying nervous excitement. "Daddy and I are going to have dinner together next week. Not because we're getting back together," she added quickly, seeing Emma's eyes widen, "but because we want to talk about planning your birthday party together." Emma's 9th birthday was approaching, and for the first time in years, it wouldn't be marked by parental warfare over guest lists and party venues. Instead, it would be a celebration of how far they had all come, a family that had learned to function not as a unit of people who lived together, but as a team dedicated to nurturing the best in each other. Rex lifted his head and looked directly at Emma, his amber eyes reflecting the afternoon sunlight. The therapy dog, who had been present for her darkest moment, was now witnessing her transformation into a confident, joyful child who no longer needed to hide in closets or hoard food in shoeboxes. The healing wasn't complete. It never would be entirely, but it was real, substantial, and growing stronger with each passing day. Emma's 2 desperate words to a dog had saved more than just herself. They had saved an entire family from the Molfin destruction they had been inflicting on each other in the name of love. 1 year after Emma Torres whispered "save me" to a therapy dog, the same Denver courtroom buzzed with an entirely different kind of energy. Where cameras had once recorded a family's destruction, they now documented what legal scholars were already calling the most revolutionary transformation in modern family law. The gallery was packed not with sensation-seeking spectators, but with family court judges, child psychologists, legal reformers, and academics who had traveled from across the globe to witness the final hearing in what had become known as Torres Protocol. Judge Margaret Chun sat at her bench, but the austere authority that had once defined her judicial presence had been tempered by something warmer, more human. The past year had changed her as profoundly as it had changed the Torres family. She had become the face of a movement that was spreading through family courts nationwide, a movement that dared to ask whether the adversarial system was serving children or simply providing theater for adult dysfunction. Emma Torres, now 9 years old and radiating a confidence that seemed to illuminate the entire courtroom, sat between her parents in the front row. Not the terrified child who had once huddled between strangers, but a vibrant girl whose soccer, trophies, art awards, and straighter report cards told the story of what became possible when adults remembered that children weren't prizes to be won, but human beings to be nurtured. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, secured with a scrunchie she had made herself in art class, the same art class her mother now taught at the community center. Her smile was genuine, unforced, the kind of expression that only appeared upon the faces of children who felt truly safe in their world. The yellow sundress of her trauma had been replaced by jeans, sneakers, and a t-shirt that read "Future Veterinarian," a career aspiration that had emerged from her bond with Rex and her newfound love for all creatures great and small. Rex lay beside the witness stand, his position now official rather than supportive. In the year since Emma's desperate plea, he had become the cornerstone of what was now called the Denver Family Court K-9 program. 17 other families had requested his services during their own healing journeys, and his success rate had convinced courts in 12 states to implement similar programs. The German Shepherd, who had once simply provided comfort, was now a certified therapeutic intervention specialist whose methods were being studied in veterinary and psychology programs worldwide. Officer Martinez stood at attention near Rex, his chest decorated with commendations he had received for developing the protocols that had made the K-9 program so successful. The man who had volunteered for the Torres case because of his own childhood trauma had found his life's calling in preventing other children from experiencing the isolation and fear he remembered so well. Michael Torres sat in the front row, his transformation so complete that colleagues from his construction days barely recognized him. The man who had once terrorized courtrooms with his rage now coached 3 youth soccer teams, had been sober for 347 days, and had just completed his certification as a substance abuse counselor. His weathered hands, once weapons of his fury, now built playgrounds and coached young athletes with the patience of someone who understood that strength meant lifting others up. "Your Honor," Michael said when invited to speak, his voice steady and clear. "A year ago, I thought fighting for my daughter meant destroying her mother. I thought love meant possession, control, winning at any cost. Emma taught me that real love means putting aside everything that doesn't serve her happiness. Sarah and I aren't friends, but we're partners in the most important job either of us will ever have, raising our daughter to be better than we ever were." Sarah Torres nodded, her own transformation equally dramatic, but manifested differently. The woman who had once weaponized legal proceedings had discovered that her truest strength lay in vulnerability, creativity, and collaborative problem-solving. Her watercolor paintings now hung in Dr. Williams' office, visual testimonies to the healing power of rediscovering abandoned dreams. Her community art classes had become a haven for other parents struggling through custody battles, providing them with healthy outlets for emotions that might otherwise fuel destructive behavior. "Judge Chun," Sarah said, rising gracefully, "when you suspended our adversarial proceedings and forced us into therapy, I thought you were violating our rights, ignoring legal precedent, maybe even exceeding your authority. Now I understand that you saved our daughter's life. More than that, you saved our family's soul." Dr. Sarah Williams sat in the gallery, her notebook filled with observations that would soon become the foundation for the Torres model, a therapeutic framework, now being implemented in family courts across the nation. Her year of working with the Torres family had produced not just healing for one household, but a replicable methodology that was transforming how divorce affected children throughout the American legal system. The custody arrangement that Michael and Sarah presented to Judge Chun bore no resemblance to traditional court orders with their rigid schedules and adversarial language. Instead, it read like a love letter written by parents to their child, a collaborative document that prioritized Emma's emotional health, educational needs, social development, and happiness above all else. Flexibility was built into every clause. Communication protocols ensured ongoing cooperation, and Emma herself had a voice in decisions that affected her life. Judge Chun reviewed the document with the satisfaction of someone watching a masterpiece come to completion. "This agreement represents everything I hoped would emerge from our unconventional approach. You've created not just a custody arrangement, but a blueprint for collaborative parenting that puts your daughter's needs first." Emma stood up, her movement drawing every eye in the packed courtroom. The child who had once been too terrified to speak was now comfortable addressing a room full of adults, cameras, and legal professionals. "Judge Chun," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom, "I want to thank you for listening to me when I asked Rex to save me. But I want everyone to know that Rex didn't just save me. He saved my whole family. And now maybe he can help save other kids too." The simplicity of her statement, the wisdom it contained, and the hope it offered sent ripples of emotion through a gallery. Legal professionals who had spent careers believing in the necessity of adversarial proceedings found themselves reconsidering fundamental assumptions about how justice could be achieved. Judge Chun smiled as she signed the final custody agreement, but her signature represented far more than the resolution of one family's crisis. It was the official endorsement of a new paradigm that had already begun spreading to family courts nationwide. Law schools were revising their curricula. Judicial training programs were incorporating therapeutic approaches, and legislators were drafting bills to formalize what had begun as one judge's unprecedented decision to prioritize healing over winning. Case closed. Judge Chun announced, but her voice carried the understanding that this ending was really a beginning. Not through victory for either party, but through the recognition that some battles are won only when everyone stops fighting and starts building. Emma's 2 desperate words to a therapy dog had accomplished something that decades of legal reform had failed to achieve. They had proven that the smallest voices could carry the most profound truths, that children's needs could transform adult systems, and that sometimes the most radical act was simply choosing love over the machinery of destruction. As the Torres family left the courtroom together, not as a reunited couple, but as partners in the sacred work of raising their daughter, they carried with them the knowledge that their healing had become a gift to countless other families who would benefit from the protocols, programs, and perspectives that had emerged from their journey through darkness into light. Rex walked beside them, his tail wagging with the contentment of a job well done, unaware that his simple act of providing comfort to a frightened child had helped revolutionize an entire system of justice. In the end, it wasn't legal precedent or judicial authority that had saved the Torres family. It was the love between a child and a dog, and the courage of adults who finally learned to listen to the wisdom that children carry in their hearts.